skies will be filled with the greatest air armada the world has ever seen. Our own Army Air Forces, the best planes ever built, 65,000 planes this year. And by the time you finish your training, America will have overwhelming superiority in the air.
Oh, there we are. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here. What a great museum. Spent hours here yesterday. I got a rock star tour from Don. I had lunch with Bill. And it's just amazing, the dedication that these people have to preserving history for us and our, the people who come after us, to be able to see these aircraft that were used to save the world. That's really, really special. Don told me that there's some 300 volunteers and some 2 or 3 people who actually get paid. So to think that people do all this for free is very, very special. So all of you that I met, I know I won't meet all 300, but each and every one of you, thank you so much for what you do in this museum. Today I'm going to tell you a story about a very tragic day in April of 1945. It begins actually many, many years later with a family mystery. This is First Lieutenant Ellsworth Croissant. He shares the same last name with me because he's my uncle. He was a bombardier in the 15th Air Force, the 459th Bomb Group. He flew 21 combat missions. Didn't suffer so much as a bloody nose. Came back just after the war ended and was given a chance in September 1945 to hop on an airplane to fly back to the Midwest where our family is from. That transport plane crashed and all aboard were killed. I obviously never met my uncle. He and my father, who was also a World War II veteran, were very close. And I remember growing up that about once a year, I would catch my dad going through a lockbox in which he had photos and newspaper clippings about my uncle. And looking back, it was probably right about the time he died, September 1945. Unfortunately, I didn't get my dad talking about him very much until his twilight. And I knew from what he told me and what the family told me that they were never satisfied by the explanation the Army gave them about why that plane crashed. They were told that it ran out of fuel circling the airfield in bad weather. So I got on, I guess it was probably Google back then, 2007, and just started to search. And what do you know, the official report that the Army Air Force did about the accident was available for purchase. So I purchased it, and I did my own sort of investigation, if you will, to try to give my family peace of mind, why the accident happened. And it wasn't because they were circling in bad weather and ran out of fuel. There was a combination of pilot error and a faulty instrument. It was a stormy day, the weather was terrible, and one of the key instruments needed to fly through that was inoperative. So the plane crashed and 7 lives were taken. I wrote this report for my family and gave them peace of mind, and shortly after that, my father died. For me, it was just the beginning of what became an obsession almost, to try to understand who my uncle was, what he was like, what he went through during the war. And one of the very first things that came into my possession was this terrible photograph of his crew. As you can see, it's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. And even worse, the names of his crew are written in cursive around the margins, so not much to go from. But as the years passed and I acquired more information, I got a better photo. I identified his crewmates, connected with all of the surviving, all of the family members of the men, and the final surviving member just happened to be my uncle's best friend. I connected with him in 2011, and we became very good friends for the rest of his days. So as my aunts, there was a family of eight siblings. My aunts all have photographic memories and care about history, and that worked to my advantage. As they learned of my interest in Uncle Ellsworth, they started to give me things. They kept everything, fortunately. And one of the things they gave me were his wartime letters. He wrote letters a couple of times a week. And sometimes in the letters, he'd sneak in what mission he went on the day before. They couldn't talk about it in their letters, but he would state the name of the city or something. So I was a CIA officer at the time. I was an analyst, so I approached it as an analyst. I would go through each target and Google it. You know, is there anything about Innsbruck or Klagenfurt or whatever? What's significant about that city? Why did the Air Force bomb it, etc.? Well, far down on the list was Linz, Austria. I'm a history nerd, but not to the extent that I immediately knew that Linz, Austria was Hitler's hometown. That's something I learned pretty shortly. Needless to say, that really grabbed my attention. So to put it on the map here, this is a map from 1943. Linz is in the center north of Austria. It was then and is today the third largest city in Austria. And I'll get to the significance of it in a moment. And then the 15th Air Force, there were two strategic air forces in Europe. One was based in England, the 8th Air Force, and then the 15th, which gets very little attention. It was based in southern Italy. So Linz, Austria, the Hitler family moved around a lot in his early years. And at age 9, in 1898, Hitler's family moved to a suburb of Linz, and for the next 9 or 10 years lived in or near the city. Talk about a chilling photo. This is a 11-year-old Adolf Hitler in middle school. This is the middle school in Linz where he was introduced to German nationalist ideas. So think about that, how the world was changed by the things that went on in this little school. Some other formative things happened to him. He went through puberty, which is not easy for anybody. Both of his parents passed, and his baby brother died. So enough to affect anyone. But Hitler dropped out of school in high school and became sort of a vagrant. He would walk around Linz with a sketchbook in which he would draw and sometimes write poetry. He loved Linz, but there were things about the city that he really hated. Some of the architecture he despised, and as a budding artist who fancied himself a great artiste, he would draw in his sketchbook what he would do to Linz if given the opportunity. Well, he got the opportunity 30 years later. This is an actual photo of the day that the prodigal son returned to Linz. He's now the Chancellor of Nazi Germany. He has entered the country at the head of a conquering army. He is thronged by locals the entire way. It takes a long time to get to Linz, and it's well past dark by the time he gets there. This is a structure that is still there today. This is the balcony of what used to be the sort of the administrative building. After a short speech by the mayor, he takes the rostrum and gives a short speech. You can find the transcript on the internet and even some of the audio. It's pretty chilling. It's kind of what we expect from Hitler. He is the prodigal son come to reunite Austria with Germany. And as you can see, he got quite a response. The response was so great, according to historians, that he decided right then and there that Austria would be subsumed within Nazi Germany. So arguably, this little town square in Linz, Austria, the events that happened there in March 1938 changed history. So the adolescent dreamer of a couple of decades before is now the leader of the soon-to-be German Empire. And he's in a position to take his dreams and turn them into reality. He commissions a study to begin to map out the transformation of Linz. He's going to make it into the cultural capital of Europe. He would be buried there next to his parents. There would be a magnificent opera house, many other structures, all encased in marble. It would be sort of a new Rome on the Danube River. And most importantly, there would be a museum where he would house all of the artwork that his minions would soon begin stealing from the four corners of Europe. Unfortunately, in order to pay for that, he had to raise funds. So he industrializes Linz. The entire eastern part of the city becomes a huge factory called the Hermann Göring Works. They would initially produce steel there, and then as the war began and then turned against the Germans, they would begin producing armaments there. Linz, going way back in history, had been a transportation hub due to its location on the Danube River. So it had one of the earliest railroads in Europe. And now, in order to transport all of the things that they produce at the Hermann Göring Works, they expand that greatly. So we have several rail targets here, and that's what the 15th Air Force would target on the day of the mission that the book is about. Because Linz is now a military target, the 15th Air Force begins the first of 21 missions to destroy it, to destroy the military targets there. This extraordinary photo is from the first one, July 25th, 1944. I interviewed one of the men on one of these B-24 bombers. He went on that mission with 10 fingers and he came back with 8. A German fighter made a run on his bomber, and he left some of his digits behind. And hilariously, he told me all I could do was start cussing at the Germans, and I wasn't even mad at them until that time. But this is a good view of Linz. This is the Danube River. This is the Göring Works. As you can see, it's been hit. And then the rail yard, the rail line comes up around like this. Unfortunately, this was the early days of strategic bombing. We didn't have a very accurate way to strike things, and the missions to hit Linz right up until the very end were completely ineffective. So we're going to fast forward again. This is April of 1945. The noose is closing around Nazi Germany, if you will. You have the Germans, the Russians, Soviet forces coming from the east, and you have Patton's Third Army coming from the west. Vienna, the capital of Austria, falls to the Soviets on April 12th and 13th of 45. But the bad news for our boys is that the Germans were able to withdraw many of their anti-aircraft guns that were once defending Vienna, and they put them in Linz because of the importance of that rail system. So on April the 20th, 1945, photographic reconnaissance planes spot in the Linz rail yards 2,000 rail cars full of presumed war munitions. And of course, the rail system was operating normally. Now at that time, there was a fear that the Russians would withdraw to the so-called National Redoubt, which turned out to be a myth, but we didn't know it at the time. They would withdraw there and conduct a guerrilla war against the Allies for years to come. So the fear was, and this is expressed in the documents from the time, that the supplies in the rail yard at Linz would end up fueling that insurgency against the Allies. So Linz had to be silenced once and for all. On April the 25th, 1945, 548 strategic bombers take off from fields in Italy just after sunrise, maybe before, to put this target out of commission. 200 escort fighters. 36 bombers turned back for mechanical reasons. So we're talking about 700 aircraft going up that day. So that's about 6,000 young Americans. Linz, throughout the war, was known as a very tough target. This was, of course, before guided missiles were invented. So The way to defend against an aerial attack at that time was to shoot an anti-aircraft artillery gun and have the cannon shell detonate at a predetermined altitude, and then the bombers would have to fly into the resulting explosion. Each cannon shell, artillery shell rather, would explode and send in all directions thousands of pieces of hot, jagged metal. The men called it flak or shrapnel. And when one of those detonated, there would be a black puff of smoke. Unfortunately, I had never found a photo of what the flak barrage looked like that day. But when I began interviewing veterans, that was the one thing that they remembered most vividly. There were so many guns shooting at them that it haunted them for the rest of their lives, and we'll return to this later. So imagine this scale of a barrage times 2, 3, or 4. Now, the Germans would shoot, they would create in the sky, imagine a cube, 2,000 feet long, 2,000 feet wide, and 2,000 feet deep. They would fill that piece of sky with these explosions, and the men would have to fly directly into it. They knew approximately where the bombs would be released, so they filled the sky with death. The men could not take evasive action, because that would disrupt these formations they were flying in, and it would also disrupt the aim of the bombardiers. So they flew straight into a black cloud of death. When Linz really captured my imagination and I started to search for it on the internet, for the most part, the men never talked about it because they couldn't, it was too horrible. But some did, and some of those accounts made it on the internet. If you read the book, this is the Roger the Lodger crew. They get a lot of pages in the book. I spoke to 3 of the men before they passed. They were shot down this day, one of the first of 15 to go down. And this man, John Dominy, his nickname was Duck because he could perfectly imitate Donald Duck. He did it with me on the telephone. He was a ball turret gunner. And you probably know the ball turret is the spherical gun turret underneath the bomber. Well, Duck shouldn't even have been there that day. He fell in the shower the night before. The guy before him used up all the hot water. So he took a really quick cold shower and slipped on the soapy floor and hurt his shoulder. Everybody knew the war was in its twilight. Didn't know when it would end, but they knew the end was in sight. He didn't want to let his buddies down, so he went on the mission. And he was in his ball turret, which is not a pleasant place to be. And he's rotating his turret, scanning the sky for German fighters. And the nose gunner calls out on the intercom, flak, 12 o'clock level. To us civilians, that means straight in front of the aircraft at our altitude is this black cloud of death that I was describing. John wrote, well, he rotates his turret to see this, and he would write, "I knew that I was going to die. The flak was like a solid black wall." And he would say in one of the interviews he did that he thought he had less than 5 minutes left to live. The barrage was that devastating, and all of the men I interviewed remembered it because of that. He starts to say the Lord's Prayer, and he only gets a few lines into it, and he knows he won't have time to finish. So he asks, "God, will you have me?" And the answer he gets back fills him with peace. And within moments, they enter that black cloud, and they would shortly after be shot down. There are many extraordinary photographs to surface from this fateful day. This is one of them. It is in the book. That is a bomber that was struck and is going down, and this is 4 minutes into the mission. An 88 millimeter shell from a German anti-aircraft gun has passed through the nose, detonated just above the ship, and if you look closely, you can see damage to the number 2 engine. A man in the nose is also wounded. They cannot stay airworthy. They make it to the outskirts of Vienna, which is now under Soviet control, and they bail out. And they all make it to the ground safely and are taken in by the Soviets. This is the crew under Dick Gray. They all made it back okay. But unfortunately, as we will see, many did not. Now, unfortunately, my publisher was very conservative when it comes to copyright issues, and they didn't let me use some of the best photos that I found in my work. That's why I like to give this presentation, not only so I can talk to you in person, but I can show you some of these photos. This is one of them. This one is kind of mind-blowing. This is a B-24 with the 465th Bomb Group. I spoke to 2 men on this aircraft, including the pilot. They had a rough day. They got hit over Linz and nearly crashed before the pilots were able to recover the aircraft. In fact, one of the chapters is a direct quote from the bombardier that I interviewed. He says, "We're running out of sky, pull up." So they actually make it. They were told at the briefing before the mission that if you're damaged, you can make it to this list of airfields. Well, one of them is this. This is in Pech, Hungary. You can see it here. This is the emergency runway, if you can even call it that the Soviets had made available to us. They effect a crash landing. It's rather rough, but they all walk away from it. And you may have spotted it if you look really close. Maybe you haven't. There's a second bomber. This is the 460th Bomb Group aircraft under the command of Vahan Merdarian. They have had a very bad day. They did not spot the airstrip in time, and they crash land. Very ugly. Never mind. I was about to make up a new word. They crash land, and in the process, they collide with, some accounts say a creek bed, others say an anti-tank ditch, but whatever it is, it tears out the nose of the bomber. And according to multiple men in the bomber, as they don't have brakes, they don't have a way to slow down, so as they're cruising along on this rough ground, they see a woman and her young daughter, and they've frozen in panic, and they're headed right for him. They're undoubtedly going to hit him. The pilot has enough hydraulic pressure in the brakes for one steady push on the brakes, and he does that just in time to slightly steer the aircraft away from this mother and daughter. And looking at the photo very, very carefully, I can swear I can see a young girl. I want to say it's her. Maybe that's just me. But anyway, both of these crews are taken in by the Soviets. The Soviets are our so-called allies, and they're obligated legally to take our men to safety and return them to American military control. Some of the funniest parts of the book are based on the adventures, or misadventures as I say, that the men get in with the Soviets. The Soviets are raping and pillaging their way across this part of Europe. The men are there to witness a lot of atrocities, to drink a lot of vodka, and just get into hijinks with them. It's somewhat entertaining, but anyway, a fantastic photo that is a great treasure of mine. I have it signed by one of the men on the bombers. Now, the Soviets more or less took their obligations seriously, but for one man, they did not, and this is not easy to talk about. It's in the book. It's not easy to read, I'm sure. This is Dale Shabilski. Dale is a 20-year-old man from Omaha, Nebraska. He's a radio operator on a B-24 bomber. He has 2 more missions to go before he can go home. What does that mean? For air combat crews at this point in the war, if you went on 35 combat missions, you could go home. Dale is on number 33 today. The finish line is in sight, and he's flying with a crew that he doesn't really know, but he trusts. They have a tough day over Linz, as they all do, but for Dale in particular, he is at his radio table, which is behind the cockpit on the B-24. He feels the aircraft lift when the bombs drop because of all that weight being shed. One of his roles is to turn and visually inspect the bomb racks to make sure that all of the bombs had actually fallen out. As he does that, a puff of smoke enters the bomb bay, followed almost immediately by a shock wave that knocks him down. Several other such things happen to the bomber in quick succession. He makes his way to his feet, returns to his radio table, and goes to brush away what he thinks is sweat above his right eye, and his glove comes back red. He's been essentially shot in the head. He's taken a piece of flak to the head above his right eye. And he would realize later that he's also taken shrapnel to the buttocks. He's not bleeding out or anything. He's in pain, but he's going to be okay. They crash land in a farmer's field in Hungary. Hungarian people who are friendly to the Allied cause immediately rush to the aircraft. One of the other men is wounded. They take him in one direction. They take Dale in another direction and place him in a church. And they take the unwounded members of the crew in yet another direction. They prevail upon Dale very faithfully to destroy his American uniform and his identity papers. He has only his dog tags, his .45 caliber pistol, and his underwear to prove that he's an American. They have no common language. They're communicating through hand signs and who knows what. But he follows along with them. They lead him, a small band of them go to Budapest. And on the bank of the river in Budapest, they spot a Soviet patrol. And they communicate to Dale, give yourself over to them. They'll get you to safety. Dale does that. And the worst events of his life soon follow. Within a matter of minutes, the Soviets begin beating him with their rifle butts, kicking him, spitting upon him, and God knows what else. They take him to a structure in Budapest, and there for the next few days, he's tortured relentlessly. Dale is of Polish descent, close to the German border. He's blue-eyed, blonde-haired, very fair-skinned. And they say, you're a German spy. Confess to being a German spy. Dale gives his name, rank, and serial number as he's required. And they beat him and torture him, shock him, and other things I won't even mention. It's horrific. Eventually, they do relent, and they do return him to American military control. But Dale's story is a tragic one. It's without doubt the most horrific one in the book out of many. But he made it through and passed away, and I'll talk more about that later. Another great photo that I couldn't use in the book, this is the remnant of a B-17. Believe it or not, I interviewed the man who was in that tail above Linz. A piece of flak tore away, these are his words, about $50 worth of hide from my ribs. That's how he described it. Not a bad wound, but certainly painful. A couple of men on the crew are wounded badly, including the pilot. The pilot essentially crawls to the bomb bay and bails out with barely enough time to open his chute. Well, I acquired this photo early in my research. I don't remember how, but I went to Linz twice for research on the book. The second time was just before COVID. And I found myself in a museum in rural Austria. And there was an Austrian man who had recently passed, but he had spent the twilight of his life trying to identify every American bomber that went down over Austria, locate it, the crash site, and also connect with any surviving members. So I'm in a museum and I've been handed a binder about that thick of his work just on this mission alone. And I come to this photo, which I already had in my possession, but the curator of the museum sees me staring at it and he says, you know what, I know where that is. So I don't speak German, so I'm with a driver/guide, And we kind of look at each other and silently agree that we're going to go find this crash site. So we hop in his car and we drive out to, it's Muhlbach, I'm probably saying it wrong, but Muhlbach, Austria. And we pull over, the first man we see out for a stroll, and my driver is talking to him in German. And he says, yes, I know exactly where that is. He hops in the car. Within about 2 minutes, we're at an Austrian house. The house, you can't really see it well. It's in the foreground right here. The house is built on the crash site. As you can see, the structure in the background, which I understand was a school in 1945, is still there. The Austrians invite us in, and this photo from World War II is in a frame next to their front door. And it gets even better. The man who led us here says, you know what, I know a guy who saw this happen. Do you want to meet him? Well, let me think about that. No. So he goes off and brings back this guy. This is Franz Kropek. He was 11 years old on April the 25th, 1945. And he comes to the site and he describes everything he saw. He was the first one on scene when the bomber disintegrated over his village. And just told me what it was like. And this is sort of on a slight incline, but the house right down the hill from the house where we met the family, they kept the tire from the bomber in the backyard. And that's it. That's a B-17 tire. And I tell you what, we make those tires well. It took a lot of effort to cut a piece off with a dull pocket knife that my driver had, but I have a piece of that tire. The last bomber to go down this day, as I said, there were 15, is one of the most horrific. I'll say that straight up. This is Herbie Westerlund. As an aviation cadet, he would go on to be, for this mission, a flight officer, I believe, a navigator. He had a camera with him up in the nose. He used it to take pictures, but when the aircraft was hit, he lost his camera, and therefore we lost an important piece of history. Anyway, the bomber is devastated above the target. One crew member is deceased on board the aircraft. Another one is wounded severely. They bail out, and unfortunately, they did not know it, but they all land in or near Mauthausen concentration camp, which is the worst murder factory in Austria. Every man who bails out is shot at from the ground, which is a war crime, including Herbie. He told me that the bullets were whistling right past his ear. One man, and I'm sorry, this is very graphic, one man is struck under the chin. The bullet exits through the top of his head. He is deceased. Another man, his parachute is struck by flak over the target, and when he jumps, it doesn't properly deploy, and he falls to his death. So 3 American lives are taken within a span of a few minutes. The survivors land. Those who survive land and are taken inside the belly of the beast. The bottom photo is called the Wall of Lamentations. These are photos I took during my visit in 2019. Anyone who was brought into the camp, mostly Jews, but there were Hungarians, Czechs, and others, Russians, they were lined up here against this wall and introduced to their new life, and it wasn't a pleasant one, believe me. So initially there were 3 men lined up here. Herbie was one of them, and the deputy commandant of the camp himself came out and abused them for a few hours. Slapping mostly, spitting upon them, verbally abusing them. Eventually the rest of the crew was brought in, as well as the bodies of 2 of the deceased. These 2 deceased are placed in the ovens and cremated. And ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't been to a concentration camp, please do so. This hill is made of human remains. It's called the Ash Cemetery. That structure is human remains out of the tens of thousands of people that the Nazis exterminated, including 2 of our own Americans. You will come out of a concentration camp as a changed individual, but it is something that we all should try to see in our lifetimes. The good news, out of all the trials and tribulations that the men faced, the raid was a wild success. A great many of the rail cars that I mentioned earlier were destroyed. This is an actual photo that a member of Patton's army took when they entered Linz on May 5th, just before the war ended. It's in the book. The rail yards were also cut in many places. My uncle was a bombardier, the lead bombardier for his squadron, so all of the bombs that his squadron dropped were dropped on his lead. And a treasured possession of mine is a scan of a bomb damage assessment with his name on it, pinpointing the places his bombs hit. And one of the places his bombs hit was a rail overpass that crossed the South Main Marshalling Yard. This photo was taken by yours truly in 2012 from that overpass. And obviously the rail system has been rebuilt. It's off screen, but the steelworks, the Goering Works were rebuilt, renamed obviously, thankfully. But Linz is still a major industrial hub to this day. That's right off screen to the left. The price was heavy. 28 Americans took their last breaths over Linz. The book is their story. The book is also about the last moments on earth of a 29th person, and that is my uncle, Ellsworth Croissant. I visited his grave in 2012, and I made a solemn promise to tell his story. Looking back, I knew enough about my uncle to maybe write 10 pages. And I was blessed to have so many doors open for me, to gather so much information, and to be touched by the lives of so many other men who experienced what he experienced. And I went back just about a year ago and laid a copy of the book at his grave and kept my promise. The men who made it back were never the same again. I spoke to about 55 survivors, and that's what they were. Let's be honest, these were more than just veterans, they were survivors. What they faced can hardly be described. This is Hal Millett. He's one of the main figures in the book. He was a ball turret gunner. He turned 19 over Vienna, Austria, just a month or two before the Linz mission. He didn't tell anybody it was his birthday. So he's in his turret. He hates being a ball turret gunner, but he's short enough to fit into the turret physically. And Hal is an atheist, so he doesn't have prayer to turn to for solace. So the way he gets through these long missions is to reason his way through it. For Hal, that means trying to think of everything that could possibly go wrong in his turret, and then try to find a solution to it. That's his mental exercise. That's how he passes his time. So he is over Vienna. He has just turned 19. And the aircraft next to them suffers a direct hit and explodes. The concussion wave catches the underside of his aircraft and sends them into a dive. And he thinks they're about to die. Unfortunately, the pilots pull out. Hal lives many, many, many more years. But he came to a realization, I don't know what you would call it. He comes up with a new credo in life that he would live by the rest of his life. The best thing that can happen to me is that the worst thing will not happen to me. I'm paraphrasing it. That's kind of a grim outlook on life, isn't it? But that's Hal. I got to know Hal very well. We became very good friends. He made me earn his trust, which I appreciated. And once I did that, it became a therapy session. He was haunted by what he saw in the skies over Europe. And he had, I'm not a doctor, I can't diagnose it, but he almost certainly had PTSD. His daughter in the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, prevailed upon him to start opening up his memories. He had taken them, he was a computer guy, so he described it to me as taking his memories and putting them on a computer hard drive that is hard to access. He wanted to just lock that all away and try to get on with his life. Well, his daughter intervened. She had spotted a posting on the internet by his pilot seeking to get the crew back together. So he slowly warms to the idea, and eventually the surviving members, and I believe there were 6 of them at the time, have a reunion in 2002 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And they all get together and compare notes and go through memories, and it just hits Hal like a ton of bricks. And when he gets home, he has a breakdown. And I was the beneficiary of him opening himself up. I got to him late in his 80s. And he gave me so much information, what it was like, what he wore, what his position, what he did at his position. He was just a wonderful man, great friend. Hal, I believe, found peace. As far as I know, he remained an atheist for the rest of his life, unfortunately, but I think he found peace. I called him in the very last days of his life. He was in the hospital, and when he picked up, I could tell that he had an audience of probably knowing how female nurses, and he was telling them stories about the war, and there was laughter, and it was really great to know that my friend had found peace. He passed in 2016 at age 90. Dale Shabilski, the man who was tortured by the Soviets, also, it goes without saying, suffered for many decades due to the treatment he received. And like Hal, he had a loving daughter who wanted her children and grandchildren to know what he did during the war. So he opened himself up. He started to write. He wrote a memoir that I was given sole access to, and from which many of the stories in the book are drawn. I did speak with him once. How this man can smile, I do not know. I think it's probably a combination of unburdening himself to people and his Christian faith, but Dale did find peace. He passed away in 2014 at age 89. Remember Duck Dominy from the beginning? This is Duck. He didn't talk about the war. A few of these men did. He had 8 children, and I've recently become friends with all of them. Visited his grave last year in Georgia. When he came home, he had a baby brother who was 10 years younger than him, and he was taking him outside to play one day, and a car backfired. And Duck kind of blacked out, and the next thing he knew, he was hiding under the front porch, hugging himself and shaking. And to his shame, when he gathered his wits, he found his baby brother playing alone in the road. So it did affect him deeply. Duck passed away in 2017 at age 92. And lastly, Dick Halliday. Excuse me. I interviewed 55 men, and this is the last one that I lost. Dick was a co-pilot in the B-17 on that day. Shrapnel entered the side of the aircraft, pierced his oxygen regulator and hose, and entered his right hip. So this man bled for us. Given the loss of oxygen at that altitude, he quickly passed out. And once the situation on the aircraft calmed down enough for people to become aware of their surroundings again, the engineer found him slumped over the control wheel. So he quickly put Dick on a portable oxygen bottle and saved his life. And he quickly came back to consciousness. He would later approach the man who saved his life to thank him, and the guy didn't want to talk about it. He was just too shaken up. Dick and I were friends for over 10 years, and he called me. I called him, when I got the book deal, and told him about it, and I was about to go have a few adult beverages with my buddies to celebrate, and while I was doing that, he called me back. He says, "Mike, I want to thank you." And mentally I'm thinking, "You have nothing to thank me about, sir." He said, "Now my children will know what it was like and why I couldn't talk about it." This is the sad thing about this generation of men. They were so humble that, and frankly so torn about what they did and what they witnessed, that they just didn't talk about it. I know there were some exceptions, but as a rule, these men took most of what they went through to their graves. I was a great beneficiary of the interest in World War II that has overtaken America these past couple of decades since Saving Private Ryan came out. And I caught these men in a sweet spot in their lives, in their late 80s and early 90s, where they were ready to start talking. This was a generation that wrote letters, so I would write a letter to these men and ask them to call me, and the majority did. The story in the book, back in the back, is a love letter to them and to their children. If you're a child of a World War II veteran and you don't know what they did, the book is for you. I hope it will help you understand why they couldn't talk about it. It was just too horrific. And that's not how they were wired. Bombing Hitler's Hometown was published just about a year ago. The UK edition on the right comes out in 2 weeks. I guess the Brits found the story to be a little darker than the Americans did, so they went with the dark background, and that's fine. The QR code will take you to my website. You will find a lot of stuff on there, some of the documents, maps, photos that I couldn't use, photos that I took, stories that I had to cut out of the book for reasons of length. You will find a way to purchase the book if you need to. But in conclusion, this took me about 13 years from start to finish to bring from an idea to a published book. Every minute I spent was worth it. I did it for them because I could not have lived with myself if I had not told this story. If you read the book, you will find that the fact that anybody survived what they went through is remarkable. Most of them did, fortunately, but all of them were different. The men who took off that morning did not return to base the same men that they were. So this book is for them and for us to try to help us understand what it was like, what they did for us. And I offer you my deep appreciation for you coming, for if you choose to buy the book and read it, my deep appreciation for that, and your deep appreciation for appreciating all of this history surrounding us. Thank you so much, and I welcome your questions.